COP30, the Gates letter, and the climate emergency. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.
All right, Dan, it is November of 2025, and we have a lot of juicy stuff to talk about today, right?
Oh my goodness, we sure do.
Yeah. All right. First of all, let's talk about COP30 and what's going on in Brazil right now, ending soon. First of all, explain to listeners who don't know what it is, what is it, and why is it important? Recognizing that you, Dan, have been to 22 of the last 30 COPs. What is COP? Why does it matter?
Oh my goodness. So many intersecting crises and disasters. So COP30 is the 30th Conference of the Parties, meaning every nation represented at the United Nations. There are a couple notable exceptions like North Korea that are not part of the negotiation process. And over the course of these, the first of the COPs back in the 1990s produced something called the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol basically said that rich countries should slowly slow their rate of greenhouse gas emissions. That was seen as anemically weak by poor countries, and that was seen as wildly socialist by rich countries. That led to a series of annual meetings, dialogues around the planet. Back then, 3,000 to 5,000 people attended these COP, Conference of the Party meetings. And this is the COP for climate. There's also a COP around oceans and a COP around biodiversity, but the 30th one, climate. That led to a process in COP 17 in Copenhagen that was supposed to be this huge breakthrough because the Danish are very socialist-minded, very investing in poor countries. That COP was an unmitigated disaster where the so-called G77, or the group of 77 poorer industrializing nations, plus India, plus China, all walked out. And it was a huge embarrassment.
And what year was that, Dan? Remind us.
That would be 2018 or so. And it was such a disaster that the mild-mannered Danes had to import police from Germany. And if you know about Scandinavian European politics, you know that for a Scandinavian to have to ask for German help was just a horrific event. So COP 17 disaster, and then the process got reorganized around COP 21 that was in Paris, and the agreements that countries have signed on to and have been trying to adjust ever since are called the Paris Accords. That was the high mark of the COP process, COP 21. We're now at 30, and with the election of Mr. Trump and his decisions and his policies that climate, we don't care about. We don't care about children. Wind power doesn't exist. Many other countries have also stepped away from the process. This COP is one that was supposed to be a real celebration of indigenous peoples and investing in so-called nature-based or environmental solutions. This COP has been wildly underattended. It is in Belém in the Brazilian Amazon. It's one of the least well-attended COPs in recent memory after some COPs that were very problematic but had up to 50 or 60,000 people in Baku and Dubai and various places. This one is just anemic, and even some of the big negotiations that went on ahead of the COP, like agreeing there should be a multi-billion-dollar fund for forests, some of the countries that negotiated this COP, like the British government, turned around and arrived at the COP and said, oh, by the way, we're not signing the agreement that we helped negotiate. So
wait, hold up here.
We're in a mess.
So you're saying that the British were trying to negotiate an agreement about forests, and what about forests?
It's even worse than that. So President Lula of Brazil organized a group of countries, both that are a home of tropical forests, like Indonesia, Brazil, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Amazon, Brazil, and Peru and others itself. And they were organizing a multi-billion-dollar fund that countries in the north or rich countries could invest in to help preserve forests, and those monies would help the countries that are the host of these forests, to preserve them. The English government, the British government, was one of the prime northern countries engaged in the dynamics and the negotiations to set up the fund. And then at the 11th hour, right before their Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was arriving in Brazil, the British government shocked at least the host country, if not many others, by saying, oh, by the way, this agreement that we have helped to negotiate, guess what? We're not signing it.
Okay,
to which
so that
jaws
happened just
dropped around the planet.
Right, and that happened just a couple days ago, yeah?
2 weeks ago, when the beginning of this negotiation process.
Okay, so tell me why you're not there, because of all the years I've known you, you're always flying off to somewhere to go to a COP.
I always go to them. I am such an old hand that some places in the world, like Marrakesh, Morocco, that have hosted the COPs twice, I have attended both versions. And I was in Copenhagen and I was in Paris and et cetera, et cetera. The reason I'm not there is because with the United States under this president, I can barely say his name in this context, pulling out of the process, many other governments started to backtrack. And indeed, one of the big shames at this meeting is that there is now a record number of fossil fuel lobbyists attending this COP, all emboldened by the anti-climate stance of the United States, what the British are now doing, what Italy is doing, what a number of countries that were on board and were partnering, maybe not effectively, but were partnering, that there has been this run away from the meeting. So much so that many of the environmental groups that were going to have meetings, as they always do at the COP, actually moved their meetings to Sao Paulo and to Rio and to other cities that are not under the COP tent, literally and figuratively, because so little is going on. Now, I got to say one caveat, and that is there have been some useful negotiations. A number of environmental groups feel like they've had good dialogue at the meeting, but what we're seeing at the macro scale here is that many of the agreements around clean energy, around north-south or rich-poor country partnerships that this meeting was all about have essentially dried up. So one of the things that happens before and at these COP meetings is that big-name companies, philanthropies, institutions, and individuals write letters and show up. And one of the really prominent events was when you get like President Obama and Bill Gates on stage together, saying we're going to get a public-private partnership around this or that. One of the most important items in this depressing COP season, to me, was the latest of Bill Gates's regular letters. They're called Bill's Notes or Bill's Letters. And he dropped one as the COP started. And Claire, from your perspective, tell me what you think was in this very highly talked about, most recent Gates letter.
Yep. So if you go to Gates, Gates, notes.com, you will see Bill Gates writes constantly about climate change, which is great. It's good that people are reading about it. And as a reminder, go to energymatters.world to get links for all of the things that we've been talking about on this episode and all of our prior episodes. But what did the Gates letter say? There were Fox News people. Everyone in the world has been referring to this. Basically, on the right, people have been saying that what Bill Gates said is that climate change is a hoax. That is not, in fact, what he said.
That's not what he said. That's right.
At all. He said that climate change is a serious problem, but will not be the end of civilization. And what he said is improving human welfare is the top priority of his energy and climate efforts.
And sadly, I have
agree
to
with
say
that.
that I think Bill Gates is just factually wrong here.
Okay, just tell me.
So it is incorrect to say that climate change won't be the end of civilization. The climate change that is forecast in this organization you mentioned, this UN agency called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I've been a member of the IPCC since 1999, so I was part of the team that did the work. I have a Nobel plaque on the wall in my office as a result. I got the plaque, but I didn't get the check, as they say, because it went to this UN agency. But this group, I am part of it, have been saying that forecasts from conservative and liberal, left, right, blue, green, whatever agencies are saying, in fact, climate change may not be the end of civilization in the sense of there won't be buildings and people left, but basically it will be the end of the economy as we know it, because climate change is forecast to cause such damage that our economy, if not our ecosystems, will be unrecognizable if we don't decide that we actually care enough about the planet and our children to act. So I disagree with Bill strongly.
I disagree with him, right, fundamentally. The other thing I have a hard time with is that he's saying this is a zero-sum game. We can either invest in climate or we can invest in humans. It's not an either-or. You don't win one and lose the other, right?
In fact, I would say it's even stronger. So what he actually writes about is we need to reduce what he calls the green premium, meaning that if you could buy a gas-powered car and you choose to buy an electric vehicle, there's a higher cost to buy the electric vehicle or to put solar panels on your home or business. But in fact, as we've been talking about in this whole Energy Matters series, well, we are now in a world where it is now lower cost to go for the green option. It's not that there's some green premium, it's that there's a green rebate. And the fact that someone like Bill Gates, who actually has invested or founded a whole number of green companies, still refuses to see that, to me, is a sign of not just him, but many people who are empowered, who are entitled, who see green as a fun dalliance, not as, in fact, a more fundamental and sound way to run the economy. So it's very sad to me to see people
not just sad, it's just wrong. Right. So I do take offense to the green premium. Now, let's be honest. I mean, there are some things that are more expensive, but I am a huge capitalist at heart. Right. I believe that what makes sense is what is the cheapest. Right. And so propping up coal-fired power plants like PJM did, which we will talk about in future episodes, makes absolutely no sense. A coal-fired power plant was just put on the market and literally no one wanted to buy it. Right? That's capitalism. There is no green premium on a lot of the energy that we're doing right now. And I think that's just like the trope of the Fox News media, right? So, and frankly, part of Bill Gates as well. So I think, so I'm taking offense to the fact that he's saying there is a green premium. Of course, there should be no green premium, but there is no green premium. In fact, there's a green discount, right, for a lot of things.
There's a green benefit. There's a green rebate if you do your purchases right.
Exactly.
And this is really hard to see in 2025 because we've been reporting that the cost to operate an electric vehicle for many years has been less than the cost to operate a gas-powered vehicle. And recently, an increasing number of vehicles are simply cheaper to purchase. Now, some of that in the past did have to do with a green premium because for a long time, because of policies passed under President Biden, there was a $7,500 credit when you bought an EV, something we talked about when Claire buys a car. But increasingly, that's not even needed. And so I think what we're seeing is not just people taking a hard, cold economic look, people really buying into, as you said, a Fox News and other right-wing factually incorrect story about the cost to go green. There are places where there is still a cost because we haven't done enough to bring technologies to the market. But Bloomberg New Energy Finance has been reporting since 2021 that it is now cheaper to build a new solar or wind power plant than to operate an existing fossil plant. And we'll put that link on energymatters.world.
Yep, absolutely. So the other thing I take offense to, of course, is that in 2011, he described solar panels on homes as quote unquote cute and a good lifestyle choice. Now, go 14 years later, that was a really stupid thing to say. He noted that their economics didn't make any sense and they're not cute. I think one of the things that Bill Gates did, and gosh, if I were a cajillionaire, I would be making different decisions too, right? So, I mean, I would applaud him for creating breakthrough energy. We will put the link on our website. But in 2015, Bill Gates and friends created Breakthrough Energy, which is an investment platform to accelerate clean energy innovation and deployment. They've supported 150 companies so far, and he deserves kudos for that. But he's mostly not investing in things that you can deploy right now. So he's saying innovation, 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 innovation. Nobody's going to argue with innovation. What about investing in things that you could actually deploy now? So this has been like causing this huge kerfuffle, and I highly suggest folks look at Open Circuit or listen to Open Circuit with Jigar Shah and Catherine Hamilton and Stephen Lacey, where they talk about the Gates letter as well. And, in typical Jigar style, he talks, about how much he hates Bill Gates. I don't think this is doing anything good for anyone. So
no, I agree.
I'd like to. Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is there's just too much social media hype around everything. We should be looking at apples to apples. Do fossil fuels make sense versus renewable energy? Compare the total operation expense, the lifetime cost of energy, right, which Lazard has issued time and time again, and not allow subsidies on either side to overwhelm the economics.
Yeah, so I think this is right. And so I'll even get a little personal here because several years ago, I sat down in a 4-hour one-on-one conversation with Bill Gates. And he and I talked back and forth. And some of the things in this current Bill Gates notes, which I actually want to read kind of into the record as if just to get the details in front of everyone listening here. But Bill and I went back and forth hour after hour arguing about the degree to which solar was much cheaper than he said, which he acknowledged years later, as you highlighted. And this idea that somehow you could invest in human health or clean energy, but not both, which he argued for at the time, which I think this has been proven not to be the case. And so I think very sadly, people are not looking objectively at the facts. So the key features for me in the Bill Gates note that came out right before the COP is that, yes, climate change is serious. We've made some progress. But to reach net zero carbon emissions, we're going to have to take a radically new stance. I don't think anybody disagrees on that. And then argues that we must keep up or grow funding for health, in particular in emerging economies, and that somehow this is an either-or choice. And you said that already, Claire, that somehow he's not understanding that actually you can get benefits of both. And then the idea that it's time to put human welfare at the center of climate strategies. And that includes reducing this green premium. Well, kind of wake up, hello, Mr. Gates. That is exactly what the United Nations developed in a whole series of policies. They come under the overall strategy of the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. They used to have another name, the Millennium Development Goals. Now they're called the Sustainable Development Goals. And these are 17 different objectives to make education equally accessible for young boys and girls, to make energy accessible to everybody on the planet by 2030, to make healthy food available to everybody. It's exactly that story that he somehow, it's as if someone who runs one of the biggest and most progressive foundations in the world hasn't been reading the notes from his own foundation. It's just baffling to me.
Right. He's doing a lot. Before we jump into more of that, I just want to put on this podcast that he had two other truths in Gates' notes. One was that temperature is not the best way to measure our progress in climate. And that was his truth number 2. And his truth number 3 is that health and prosperity are the best defense against climate change. He says when everyone has access to affordable, reliable, clean energy, the world will be more prosperous and more resilient to climate change, which I agree with, right? We wholeheartedly agree about that. But Dan,
that's
I want to ask you.
We like apple pie, right? Because I think that's like a generic good, and no one has been disagreeing with that
from the
for
beginning.
years,
Right. But what I want to dive into, which you're not going to find in any other podcast that talk about the Gates letter, is I want to talk, Dan, with you about what you've been doing in Kenya since the early 90s when I first met you. So tell us how, like, some of the work that you've doing, let's focus on Kenya here, but when everyone has access to affordable, reliable, clean energy, their lives are better and they are more resilient to climate change. So explain, like, your solar heat, it's cooking stoves and things like that, and just as an example.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously a lot to unpack there, and there's many groups, my laboratory, many other groups doing really interesting work. But I think that if we try to keep it focused on some of the projects we're doing, I'll just highlight one example. When I was at USAID, and a federal agency, the U.S. Agency for National Development, that Mr. Trump, as president, decided to close or fold into the State Department, USAID was a major player in investing in clean water, clean energy, clean ag, clean health around the planet. One of the things that I directly work on to this day is making clean energy accessible to not just people in Kenya. We work across East Africa, but let's focus in Kenya for the second. So working at the policy level to make the importation of solar panels and batteries easier, to working with private sector in Kenya so that they can become a hub of first assembly and then actual manufacture of solar panels, batteries, electric bikes, electric vehicles. And Kenya has hit huge milestones. So Kenya as a country, about 40 million people, same size as California. Kenya is today about 94% powered by clean energy. Wind, geothermal, hydropower, and solar are the backstop of the Kenyan economy. And that's a huge success story.
Back up for a second. They're literally the backstop of the economy.
94% of all energy, all electricity consumed on the grid in Kenya is from renewables. So meaning,
isn't that crazy?
No, it's not crazy at all. Meaning that California, we've talked about a lot. California is about 69%. Kenya is 94% clean energy. Costa Rica is 100%. Austria is about 96% clean energy. This is not unique. It's not the majority of countries, but country by country have made super impressive progress here. And this climate process, in some cases, helped to drive the efforts. In other areas, it gave the governments motivation. So one of the areas that I work closely on that I won't go into here, we'll do it in a later one, is that we work closely with the government of Morocco. And over 10 years, they not only made solar and wind power the center of their energy system, but they became the developer of some of the largest commercially successful batteries anywhere on the planet. And they did this to export green power to Europe. Europe has its own problems, and so they weren't interested to buy as much as Morocco could generate. So Morocco has become a hub of clean energy in country and is working on export deals and has signed export deals with many of its neighbors. So Kenya is not unique. But if we jump back to Kenya for a second, one of the real interesting versions that really boils this down, and it's, again, I think facts that someone like Bill Gates should know because his foundation has been hugely important in the area of healthcare, is the following. A global effort was put together to invest in clean energy at health centers all across Africa. It has several different names. I think Powering Health is the most intuitive name. And the idea is, of the 170,000 health clinics on the continent, from the smallest dispensaries to the biggest hospitals, about 100,000, so 60% of those do not have access to affordable or reliable electricity. Okay. So this effort
is to build... And that's been for the beginning of time, right?
Correct, correct.
Right, and so a lot of this is because so many of the folks are off-grid or there is no grid where they are.
Or
right?
The grid is only built to areas of politically important communities. If a new president is elected from a particular region, then suddenly infrastructure gets built there. And that's not just in Africa. We actually have seen this in the US, but it gets painted on the African continent a lot, and that infrastructure goes where the patronage dollar flows. So this effort to take health clinics, because everybody wants good health, and to make them the hub of energy so that we would have health clinics that have reliable power so the operating room is on, the freezers are working, so your cold chain for vaccines is being supported. All of those things are a great anchor customer for clean energy at the health clinic. But then you should overbuild that clean energy because the community around it might want to buy that energy, or you provide internet services or water purification. This effort overall was one of the hallmarks of the Biden administration effort to invest in lower cost, more reliable energy. And Kenya and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Eswatini and Sierra Leone and Nigeria have all been countries that have leaned in pretty heavily to this program, of which Mr. Trump cut out the international funding, cut it off at the base. And so these programs exist and they were successful where they happened, but the international coordination has been thrown into chaos by the U.S. closing its U.S. Agency for International Development.
Right. But at the same point, again, from the business perspective, you couldn't have funded that on its own. You couldn't have done it.
That's
I mean,
tricky
that was reliant on grants from the U.S. government.
Even that it's interesting because in the early days when solar and wind was still more expensive than fossil fuels in the U.S., you couldn't do it without grants. But Kenya is now a country where there are more so-called mini-grid developers, meaning small local grids that power 10 homes, 50 homes, sometimes 1,000 homes, done commercially. Kenya is now the host of over 50 electric vehicle companies. Rwanda is home to almost a similar number of these new clean energy startups, and most of them are actually existing without subsidies at all. What this international money from the U.S. and other agencies for development was really for was gathering the data, being a clearinghouse of information, providing the upfront loans so that these enterprises could pay back over time, and a program that I have run with colleagues in the Democratic Republic of Congo over the past 2 years and run by quite an amazing research fellow, a postdoctoral fellow named Sam Miles, is that by providing these resources to health clinics, they have been able to pay back the loans to them on time at a much higher return rate than loans that go out to many businesses in the U.S., meaning that these distributed health clinics in the Congo, where there's a civil war going on, are a better business bet than random loans in the United States to small businesses. And that's a statement that unreal. I could not make 5 years ago. That is true today.
Wow. So much more to unpack, but at this point, we are at the end of our episode. Please reach out to us. Send us comments at energymatters.world. It does feel very much like a climate emergency, and it does feel like so much of the work that you and I have done over the last 20 years, 20, 30 years has really taken a fall.
Taken a beating over the last
Taken a beating. Year. Yeah, it's a little overwhelming. But thank you all for listening. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.